Hi, welcome to my office. For the next few videos, I'll be recording in my office so that I can do some screencasting and you can see how I work through some of these legal problems that you're going to be working through. This video picks up on the last video where we talked about using formal reasoning concepts to work through some legal reasoning problems. And this video is going to continue with that by showing you, as promised, how we all use inductive reasoning on a regular basis. And so the first example that we're going to do is an example where you can see how teenagers use inductive reasoning to come up with rules that guide their behavior when no explicit rules are given. So let me share my screen with you. So what we're going to do is run through a hypothetical where a teenage boy synthesizes a curfew based on some things that have happened to other members of his family who are around the same age. So let's start with our teenage boy. We have a quote-unquote client who is 16 years old, would like to come in at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night and wants to know if that's probably okay. So to find out if that's okay, we're going to ask some questions about what has happened in his family previously when he or other members of his family who are around the same age have come in at 11 o'clock on a Thursday. And what he's going to tell us, first of all, is that in his immediate family, that's a situation that hasn't come up yet. And so what he can tell us is what's happened with his sister several times. So the first case, our case one, involves his 17-year-old sister. She came in once at 10:30 p.m. on a Friday. When she came in at 10:30 that Friday, her parents were waiting up in the living room. They were just watching the early news, and when they greeted her, it was pleasantly. There was no sign that there was any problem with her coming in at the time she came in. And so the result is that there were no negative consequences to her action. So remember, we said that with inductive reasoning, what you do is take a specific instance and extrapolate a rule from that. You go from the specific to the general. So from this, we can come up with a rule that 10:30 p.m. on a Friday is not too late to be out. Now, remember we said that the fact that you only have one case or maybe a few cases to extrapolate the rule from doesn't mean that you can't extrapolate a rule. It just impacts how confident you are in the rule. And so with only one case to extrapolate from, you may not be super confident, but this is a reasonable rule that you could come up with based on this. However, as you might imagine, we'd want a little bit more information before we gave our 16-year-old client any advice. So he tells us there was another time not too long ago when his sister came in at 11:30 p.m. on a Saturday evening. The result then was that his sister was grounded for a week. His parents were not happy with her at all. And so we can come up with a refinement of the rule that we came up with after the first case. The refinement of the rule might be something like this. On a non-school night, curfew is between 10:30 and 11:30. Because now we have two non-school nights. There's no school the next day in either one of these instances, and yet 10:30 was okay and 11:30 was not. So we can extrapolate from that on a non-school night, somewhere between 10:30 and 11:30, maybe 10:30 is the limit, is where the curfew is. So case number 3, another situation involving our client's sister. She came home once on a Wednesday night at 10:30 p.m. Now remember, she's come home at 10:30 before, but that was on a Friday night. So the result here was that she was actually grounded for coming in at 10:30. So now we can refine our rule further with this additional piece of information. And so our refined rule might be something like, on a non-school night, curfew between 10:30 and 11:30. On a school night, curfew is before 10:30. So we've got a little bit of refinement to this. Now, we've got one more case that he tells us about. This involves his 16-year-old cousin, who's a boy. His 16-year-old cousin comes in at 11 p.m. on a Thursday night. The result was that there were no negative consequences. So there's a lot to unpack here, actually, the differences between cases 1 through 3 and case 4. Notice that I've noted at the top of the chart that cases 1, 2, and 3 are binding, meaning the same decision maker is making the decisions in all 3 of those cases that will make the decision in our client's case. Case 4 is only persuasive, though. That involves a different set of decision makers. That's going to be our client's aunt and uncle. And so while that may be persuasive, values on when teenagers should come in on a school night or a non-school night tend to run roughly the same in families. So we can expect similar policies to apply. We can expect some similar values to apply. And yet the aunt and uncle's decision on their children doesn't bind our client's parents. So that's only a persuasive case. So the fact that the 16-year-old cousin came in at 11 p.m. on a Thursday seems to suggest that our client might be able to come in on a Thursday also. And so we ask, is there anything else about this situation that might indicate that it would or would not be okay for you to come in at 11 o'clock on a Thursday? And the client remembers that on that particular Thursday night, there was no school Friday. So Thursday, although ordinarily a weeknight, now is a non-school night in this particular situation because there was no school the next day. So now we know that on a non-school night, curfew between 10:30 and 11 is okay. We've got that window narrowed down to 11 instead of 11:30. So on a non-school night, curfew is between 10:30 and 11 now. And since curfews tend to be on the half hour or the hour, it's unlikely that the curfew would be something like, 10:45 or 11:15. So we can be pretty assured that 11 is probably the latest, 11:30 being too late, at least in our client's case. And then on a school night, curfew still before 10:30. So see how with each additional case, we've been able to refine our rule a little bit more. And so that's exactly how the process works in court cases. So now let's figure out what we're going to tell our client. So we have our client who wants to come in at 11 on a Thursday. We've got these 3 situations with the 17-year-old sister, and from those situations, we are sure that on a non-school night, curfew is between 10:30 and 11, and on a school night, curfew is before 10:30. So one of the first things we want to ask the boy is there school the next day? Because if there's school the next day, this is probably, 11 is probably going to be too late based on what happened with his sister. If there's not school the next day, it looks like 11 is probably going to be okay. We know from these first 2 cases that 11:30 is too late, but 10:30 is okay. And the persuasive case seems to indicate that 11 o'clock is probably still okay, assuming that his parents follow along with similar views about curfews that his aunt and uncle do. So the rule, it looks like, is that curfew is probably going to be 11 on a non-school night. And so if Thursday turns out to be a non-school night, he's probably okay. If Thursday turns out to be a school night, probably not okay. So our result is going to depend on whether Thursday is a school night on this particular week. So let's look at a couple of other things with regard to this persuasive case. The 3 binding cases all involved his 17-year-old sister, and the persuasive case involved his 16-year-old male cousin. Now, we're going to assume that the difference in treatment is not related to gender. We're going to assume that the decision maker is not going to make a decision on a discriminatory basis. So although we could say that that might have something to do with the rule, we're not going to include that because we're going to assume a reasonable decision maker that doesn't make discriminatory rules. We might also say that it has something to do with the age, that the younger you are, the later you get to stay out. However, that doesn't make much sense. That flies in the face of common sense. And so as we draft our rules, we want to make sure that they comport with common sense also. So it looks like our client's probably okay. We could tell him you're probably okay staying out till 11 on a Thursday night as long as there's no school on Friday. If there is school on Friday, it looks like you could expect to be grounded for 1 week based on the types of punishments that have been meted out before. So this is inductive reasoning. We started out without a rule to govern the behavior, but by seeing how a decision maker has handled several situations, we can start to figure out what the rule probably is that should apply in future situations. So that's our first example. Now we're going to start to move on to more legal examples in the next video.